Let's dive right into this explainer and set the stage for one of the most famous, captivating maritime mysteries of the entire 20th century. For decades, the mere mention of the Bermuda Triangle has conjured up these terrifying images of compasses spinning wildly out of control, massive ships vanishing without a trace into thick fog, and airplanes just totally dropping off radar screens, never to be seen again. Well, today we are going to completely unpack the anatomy of this massive urban legend.
We cannot be sure of any direction. Everything is wrong, strange. The ocean doesn't look as it should. That haunting radio transmission, which was attributed in a 1962 magazine article to the flight leader of the infamous Flight 19, perfectly sets the eerie, desperate mood of the Devil's Triangle. When you hear words like that, it's incredibly easy to see why the public became so utterly fascinated with the idea that something completely sinister was lurking out there in the dark waters of the Atlantic.
Section 1. The Devil's Triangle. Defining the space.
Before we can unravel the disappearances themselves, we really need to map out exactly where these spooky events are supposedly happening. And what's absolutely crucial to grasp here is how massive and loosely defined this boundary actually is. It gives the legend a ton of room to operate. While it's generally bounded by Miami, San Juan in Puerto Rico, and the island of Bermuda, different authors have stretched these borders wildly over the years. Some even expand the boundaries all the way over to the coast of Ireland. This flexibility is key because it means that depending on who's telling the story, an accident hundreds of miles away can suddenly become a Bermuda Triangle mystery.
Section 2. Origins of the legend. How the myth was born.
So here's the wild part. The crucial takeaway is that this wasn't some ancient mariner's curse passed down through the centuries. It's actually a relatively modern creation, literally constructed over time by journalists and authors who were just looking for a sensational story. It didn't start with superstitious sailors in the 1700s. It actually started in 1950 when Edward Van Winkle Jones wrote an Associated Press article noting a few unusual disappearances. Then, in 1952, George X. Sand laid out that familiar triangular shape we all know in Fate magazine. But it wasn't until 1964 that Vincent Gaddis officially coined the catchy name the Deadly Bermuda Triangle in Argosy magazine, claiming there was this long historical pattern of strange events. And from there, the idea spread like wildfire. Authors like Charles Burlett soon took these magazine articles and turned them into massive, supernatural bestsellers. His 1974 book became an absolute cultural phenomenon. He didn't just report on missing ships, right? He wove in these wild theories and anomalous forces. Suddenly, the mystery was fully mainstream and, let's be honest, highly profitable.
Section 3. Famous disappearances. Fueling the fire.
To really understand the public's obsession, we have to look at the terrifying, high-profile cases that convinced the world this curse was for sure real. We're talking about massive ships carrying hundreds of people and tons of cargo that simply vanished or were found completely deserted. It was the perfect fuel for the myth. Take the USS Cyclops, a Navy collier carrying heavy manganese ore. It disappeared with 306 people on board, which remains the Navy's single largest non-combat loss of life. Then you had the Carol A. Deering, found totally abandoned off North Carolina. And, of course, the SS Cotopaxi, which sent out a desperate distress call saying it was taking on water in 1925 before going completely silent. Which brings us right back to our opening quote. The loss of 14 men on a routine Navy training flight basically became the crown jewel of the Triangle's mysteries. On December 5, 1945, these 5 bombers became hopelessly disoriented. And to make a terrible tragedy even worse, a PBM Mariner rescue plane with a 13-man crew that was sent to find them also disappeared in what is suspected to have been a mid-air explosion. So how do you explain these baffling losses? Well, Triangle writers pushed some incredibly wild paranormal explanations. They claimed that submerged rock formations in the Bahamas, like the Bimini Road, were actually leftover technology from the lost city of Atlantis, literally pulling ships down. Others suggested time and space warps were sucking vessels into a parallel universe, or even went as far as alien abductions via UFOs. It made for a really great read, but very, very poor science.
Section 4. The skeptical reality. The crushing weight of data. Okay, let's step out of the fog of mystery for a second and look at what rigorous, authoritative investigation actually tells us about all this. We really have to ask, is this patch of ocean actually cursed? Or is it just heavily misunderstood by sensationalist writers?
Well, in 1975, a librarian and author named Larry Cush published a totally devastating factual takedown, proving that the mystery was largely built on exaggerated numbers and straight-up ignored weather reports. He actually went back to the original period newspapers and found that writers like Berlitz were, well, frankly, just doing sloppy research. They would report a ship missing in calm seas, while Cush found historical weather records showing massive tropical cyclones ripping through the area on that exact day. Furthermore, when you look at it proportionally, the number of missing ships here wasn't actually any higher than in any other heavily traveled part of the ocean. The reality becomes crystal clear when you look at the experts. I mean, marine insurance markets don't charge higher rates here, and the Coast Guard is officially skeptical of the whole myth. Lloyd's of London, the people who are literally in the business of calculating maritime risk, determined that an unusually large number of ships don't actually sink there. The Coast Guard consistently points out that, considering the massive volume of daily traffic going through that area, the disappearances are completely statistically insignificant. And remember the infamous missing SS Cotopaxi we talked about earlier? Well, it was finally identified in 2020. It just proves that time and science often solve what sensationalism calls a mystery. Thanks to marine biologists, a wreck found 35 nautical miles off St. Augustine, Florida, was confirmed to be the Cotopaxi, showing she sank right during a known tropical storm exactly as her distress call suggested.
Section 5. Natural Explanations. Science over Superstition. So if it's not aliens or Atlantis, what is actually taking down these ships and planes? Writers always love to claim compasses spin wildly in the triangle, but navigators have known for centuries about natural magnetic variation. This completely debunks the magnetic anomaly theory. You see, only in very specific places do magnetic north and true geographic north align perfectly. It's just a normal navigational adjustment, but to an uninformed public, it sounded like some sinister paranormal force was hijacking the instruments. Then, you have to consider the surface velocity of the Gulf Stream. Think of it like a massive, incredibly fast ocean river that can sweep wreckage miles away before a search even begins. Moving at up to 2 meters per second, if a small plane makes a water landing or a boat has engine trouble, it gets rapidly carried away from its last reported position. This makes rescue missions incredibly difficult in such a vast ocean. Now combine that swift current with sudden, violent weather drops, explosive microbursts, and simple human disorientation, and you have a perfectly natural recipe for disaster. This area is notorious for terrifying hurricanes. You also have sudden downdrafts of cold air that can hit the surface like a bomb. Add to that human error, like sailors stubbornly heading into known storms, and even hypothetical natural phenomena, like underwater methane hydrate eruptions that could theoretically decrease water density and sink a ship. Well, there are plenty of perfectly logical, terrifyingly natural hazards here. There's a brilliant quote from a 1976 Nova documentary that really hits the nail on the head. Science does not have to answer questions about the triangle, because those questions are not valid in the first place. Ships and planes behave in the Bermuda Triangle exactly the same way they behave everywhere else in the world. When you trace the claims back to their original sources, the mystery just simply evaporates. It was essentially an invention of writers, piecing together disparate tragedies to sell a thrilling narrative. So the next time you hear a spooky story about a vanished ship, you have to ask yourself this very question. Did they really fall victim to an otherworldly dimension, or is it just the immense power of the ocean, combined with the even more powerful human desire for a good story? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember, always keep questioning what you read.